Hello, I'm Hope Katz Gibbs, creator of the Incandescent Radio Network, here with my friend and colleague, Tony Farmer, host of the Black Lives Matter radio show. We are thrilled you are here with us today, so let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Black Lives Matter radio show on the Incandescent Radio Network. I am Hope Katz Gibbs, creator of Incandescent Incorporated and Incandescent Radio, where podcasts for you are coming from all kinds of wonderful people, including tonight's guest, Suzette Love, who is talking to us from her home in Southern California. Your host is Tony Farmer from DC, and I'm here in New Mexico, so we're all across the country this evening. But I'm thrilled to introduce you all to Suzie because she is one of my favorite people. We met when I was a graduate student at Claremont Graduate University in the psychology department, and Suzie was a classmate of mine in a class called Good Work, taught by a woman named Jeanne Nakamura, who's a world-class, world-famous positive psychologist. And Suzie and I were the oldest students in the class, and we sat in the corner when we'd go to class discussion and they'd ask us questions, and we'd huddle and we'd try and figure things out and figure out what they were trying to teach us. But mostly we just had these wonderful conversations. It wasn't until the end of the semester that Suzie told me that she was a rock star, a pop star in Sweden in the 80s. And I'm like, no way! This amazing woman who is getting her PhD in education, and we're sitting here talking about what the meaning of good work is. And here she was like a rock star. So that's just the beginning of who she is and what she has accomplished and what she's going to accomplish. So Tony, I throw it over to you and have a ball.
Thank you, Hope. Suzie, welcome to Black Lives Radio Show, Black Lives Matter Radio Show. And we're so happy that you've taken the time out to spend some time with us and talk to us about who you are and what you want people to know about you. I grew up an Army brat, which means that I moved a lot. You, my goodness, from Ann Arbor, Michigan to California to Sweden. Tell us a little bit about that journey.
So I tell everybody this very, very funny story. Okay. When I was little, I lived in the country, in the woods, in the middle of my grandfather's cornfield. And he had about 200 acres in Michigan. So when each of his children married, he gave all of them land to build a house. Anyway, so, we'd go outside and play. Of course, all we had was grass and and corn. But I don't know. Ever since I was very, very young, probably 4 or 5 years old, I always wanted to go somewhere else. And so when I would go outside and play, I would play a game with my sister. And the game was called Gilligan's Island. Okay.
Okay.
And we lived near an airport. And so what we would do is I would go outside and I would say, okay, when you see an airplane, I said, jump up and down and say, help, help. Get me out here, help.
Okay.
And so, I tell that story because eventually, my mother's job transferred her to California. And I went to school one day. I was in 5th grade, and my teacher in 5th grade, one of my favorite teachers, Mr. Henniger, showed a movie about the development of California. And when I saw that movie in 5th grade, I was like, that's my spot.
Okay. All right.
And when my mother came home from work that day, I told my mother, I said, Mom, I said, guess what? I said, we're going to move to California. And my mother just got this stunned look on her face. And little did I know it, but my mother's boss had actually been talking to her about making a transfer to California. So, that's my story of my journey to California. Now, my journey to Sweden is also, it's just out of a crazy movie script. When I was in high school, so we moved around a lot. Finally, we ended up in the Inland Empire, and so ended up at my high school, which was in La Puente, California. I was only at the school for one semester, and then the next year was my senior year. So this is during my senior year, I took a tennis class. And so when I took this tennis class, I met this guy in my tennis class. And this guy was from Sweden. He was like a Swedish exchange student. Now, Nogales High School was pretty much at that time all Mexican and Black. And this guy is like an exchange student from Sweden. And so I really don't know what happened, but we were immediately like just became friends, and we were stuck together for the entire year. So finally, at the end of the year, and my mother also, she, treated him just like he was one of us. He went everywhere with us. Anyway, finally at the end of the year, he says, well, Suzette, I think I'm going to invite you to come to my house in Sweden. I said, boy, are you crazy? My sister and I just laughed. We're like, your dad is not going to let you bring some Black girl up in his house. Are you out of your mind?
Right.
He said, I can do whatever I want to do. And he calls his dad on the phone and he tells his dad, I'm just letting you know I'm going to bring my friend Suzette home. Okay, so just get ready.
Let's deal with it. Deal with it, Dad.
So exactly. And he was very typical Swedish guy, tall, blonde hair, blue eyes. And so the next year, my mom and my stepdad gave me a ticket, and that ticket was so expensive. I mean, they had to sacrifice. It was $1,000 for me to get on that plane. And so, and I went to Sweden. And actually, in the beginning, I was going to stay for a year and go to school, but I kind of got culture shock and chickened out.
Okay.
Anyway, I spent the entire summer with he and his family. And we have been the best of, he's like my oldest friend. We have been the best of friends ever since. We are still in contact with each other, still call each other. So now we have to fast forward again to another crazy story.
Sure.
So I decide that I am going to be an exchange student when I'm at Cal State Fullerton.
Okay.
So I wanted to go to France because I decided I'm going to double major in French and political science, blah, blah, blah. And my mom's like, oh no, you're not going to France. It's crazy over there. Those people are crazy. And I was like, what? I said, I'm studying French. That doesn't make sense. And she's like, well, you already know people in Sweden. I already know Lars' family. And so you need to go to Sweden. I said, I don't know. I haven't studied anything about Sweden. She's like, well, you better learn something because you're not going to France. So I ended up, because of that association, deciding that I was going to go to Sweden. So I went to Sweden, and my program in Sweden was Russian and East European Studies.
Okay.
After so the first part of the program was that you had to learn Swedish in order to go to Uppsala University. So I did Swedish for, we had Swedish for 5 months, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. And not that I could speak Swedish when I was done, but I took the classes.
Right.
But anyway, here's the thing. One of my Swedish teachers, actually both of my Swedish teachers, interestingly enough, were musicians. And so one of them had a band. And, he heard me singing some random Christmas song, okay? And he was like, oh, you have a really great voice. You ever thought about maybe singing professionally? I said, yeah, my mom's not having it.
Right.
So
I might have thought about it, but Mama's.
I thought about it, but my mother was like, you better go to school so I can get my money's worth out of you. So he invited me actually to sing with his band. So there's a guy in his band who had a brother, and they were DJs. And that's kind of where it began, with me being a performer, a Swedish pop star, because I met them, and like immediately when I met them, they were like, "Oh, hey, we're thinking about, kind of starting a band and getting a record contract." I'm like, next.
Right.
So right before I get ready to go home, well, I went into the studio, I recorded a couple of things with them, right? And I didn't think about it a whole lot because I was in school. So
Mhm.
finally, I'm getting ready to go home, like 2 days before I'm going home. And they're like, "Guess what? We got a record deal." I was like, "Oh my God." I said, "My mother's going to kill me." And I was like, "Oh no." So, I had a conversation with them because, the students get a host family.
Mhm.
And I got the best family. I'm telling you, these people treated me like I was their child. So I went to my Swedish mom and I was like, Birgitta, I don't know what to do. Like, first of all, I'm scared to tell my mother. And secondly, should I take this opportunity? What should I do? And she was like, "Well, you know, just try, see what happens. You
Mhm.
never know." She said, "It's an opportunity and you might regret it if you don't try." And so I, got on the phone with my mom and my dad that night. And I said, I kind of signed a record deal. And my mom was like, "Ah."
Oh, mom and dad, yeah, I went to school and
I
everything is
went,
going
yeah,
well. Oh, and by
exactly.
the way, I signed a record deal, so I'll be
And that's
touring
kind of how the
Europe.
conversation went. By the way, and my mother was like, "I didn't send you over there to become a rock star." I said, "It's not really a rock band," but she was like,
Right.
so, so that's kind of where it all began with that. But yeah, I have always felt that I wanted to kind of journey around the world and see what was out there.
So I
Um,
would imagine that the work you did, by the way, the name of the band was called Vibe, right?
Vibe, yeah,
Vibe, and a mix of jazz and hip hop and a number of different genres kind of mashed
exactly.
together. But
Yeah.
I imagine that you did end up touring France.
No, I didn't go on a tour de France, but I did end up touring all over Sweden. I did go to London. Um, and that would have, traveling around Europe because we were released all over Europe and Japan. And we were like the number one band in Sweden for, many weeks. We had our stuff on the top of the charts there. And so I'm really proud of that. I'm pretty sure I'm the first African American woman who ever, was signed a record deal, in that country, on a soul label. It was actually a label dedicated to soul music. So I'm really happy about that.
So
Yeah.
here's this young woman from California at this point who goes to school and ends up a pop star.
Yeah, it was
And
crazy.
that is one of the most fascinating stories that I think I've ever heard. What was it like culturally for you personally to one trying to fit into this environment that you didn't grow up in, trying to be a
Yeah.
student, and then all of a sudden this fame, right? People
Yeah.
knowing who you were and wherever you
Yeah,
went.
exactly.
How did you manage that?
Well, first of all, so it was after I finished my year, my study abroad year, and then I went back. And the thing is, we were kind of just coming along, beginning it was the beginning of people getting to know our band and who we were. But culturally, first of all, I credit my friend from Sweden who was so good. When I went and stayed with his family, he taught me so much about Swedish culture. His his grandfather was actually the assistant to the King of Sweden for many years. And so his grandparents were, uh, kind of really, what can I say? I met his grandmother, and his grandmother was like an expert on Swedish culture, basically. And just going to her home for dinner was was an education session. So I learned from them. And so when I went back as an exchange student, I was somewhat acclimated to the way the culture worked. Uh, and for me, I really love learning, just like you. I'm a lifetime learner, and I'm just a sponge. I absorb everything. And the one thing that I learned is the key to being able to enjoy yourself in another culture is that you got to learn the language. If you don't learn the language, you still have a barrier, to cross. Once you learn the language, I think people are so much more at ease because they don't have to struggle with their language. And the conversations are much more delightful, you know. So I would say having all those Swedish classes really paid off in the end because I ended up living there for 5 more years.
My goodness.
So yeah, and during that time I really learned a lot about the culture, the history. In fact, my Swedish friends at the university, we would, their documentaries would come on TV, and I'd be like watching these Swedish documentaries and just making comments, and they're like, "Oh my God, you know more Swedish history than we know." So
Well, you said something that really resonated with me, which is when you're trying to acclimate to a culture, it's important to know the language. And one of the things that
yes,
we want to display here with the Black Lives Matter radio show is how different cultures, even within the same United States, have these different languages and how those
yes,
things can be barriers
yes,
in the process of understanding each other to the point where we can trust one another and we can
yeah,
communicate effectively and we can express intent and we can express meaning. And I think the wonderful thing about your story is that you kind of crossed a bunch of different lines that most people will look at as barriers. You crossed the culture line, you crossed the language
yeah,
line, and then you went into the universal language, which was music. So I
mhm.
look at you somewhat as a communication expert and using those skills now. So
Yeah.
tell us how you came from the pop charts in Japan and London and Sweden back to the United States. Tell us that story.
You know, I think that regardless of who you are, number one, it's important that you know what your values are. This is, what my mother has trained us to do our entire lives. She's like, I don't want you following people. I want you to be leaders. And you can't be leaders unless you know who you are. And she said, before I left to go to Sweden, she said, I trained you to have certain values. And when you leave this house, you take those values with you and you bring them back home.
Okay.
So the message was, you know who you are, you know, your intentions on in everything you want to do. She said, so I want you to just maintain your own personhood, you know. And so I think that helped me to remain grounded and helped me to remain realistic about my goals. So when I got into the band and I started performing with them, I said to myself, I go, right now I'm 25, and I said, I'm going to give this about 5 years. I had certain goals that I wanted to achieve during that time. And I said, if I have not achieved those goals within that time, I'm going to call it quits and I'm going to, move on to the next thing. Because in Sweden, I actually met a lot of African Americans who were entertainers and who had been there for many years. and who were still striving to make it, in Europe. And I decided then, look, I'm going to move on, because I see how difficult it can be if you're in a space where you're kind of in this world where you don't know what you're going to do next. The only thing you know is I want to make it.
Mhm.
So I also had my family who had expectations of me, and especially my grandmother. And my grandmother she was very proud of me. But at the same time, I told my grandmother, I go, when I leave Sweden, I really want to go to France finally. And I want to, and my grandmother told me, she said, you don't need to go to no France.
That sounds like my grandmother.
Yeah, exactly. She said, what you need to do, she said, now you went out there and got all that blah, blah, blah education. And she said, you need to come back here and you need to help your people.
Wow.
And so I was like, wow, and my grandmother was 100% right. So that's I think that was my mindset, to not kind of, I don't want to say, going to France would have been a waste of time, but I think my grandmother was saying there are some really important things that you can do, and they need to be done here.
So you come
So
back to the States, you
yes,
become a scholar, right?
yeah,
And
which has been my dream. My grandmother used to call me the little professor ever since I was, I don't know, little kid, like 3 and 4 years old, because I had glasses when I was 4 years old. I think I got my first pair of glasses, and immediately she started calling me the little professor.
love it. I love it. Just a side note, I think it's so important that when we're teaching our children to set goals for themselves, to ensure that we educate them on what it means to have self-fulfilling prophecy. You kind of
Yes.
started off with you and your sister were outside, looking at the planes go by and saying, no, save me. I need to get out of here. And then,
Yeah.
seeing on TV, the documentary about California and hey, mom, I want to gotta go to California. And then, learning languages and learning different
Yeah.
cultures. And now you're back in the States and you're embarking on this new career as a scholar. And I read in your bio that you are or were a preschool teacher. So that must have been very interesting starting off,
Oh yeah.
taking
Well,
all of this experience and then trying to
well,
crawl into these young, hungry minds. Tell us about that.
I loved being a preschool teacher. And the thing is, I kind of well, my first job out of high school was McDonald's, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to work every day, and because I am the only person working there who was, I think I was over 18 at the time, and I wasn't in school. Not over 18, but I was over 17, and I wasn't going to high school. So that meant I could work, that they could schedule me after 10 o'clock at night. Everybody else had to go home. So I'm working at this job, and every night I'm like dog tired, and I had to get up the next day and go to community college. And I literally, my knuckles were dragging. I was like, I can't do this every day. And one day I just like overslept. I just needed a nap. And I called my boss at McDonald's. I was like, okay, can't I can't come into work tonight because I don't have a ride. I live 2 blocks from McDonald's. He was like, he's like, well, I'm so sorry, Suzette, we just can't accept that. He goes, do you mean you quit? I said, no, I mean, I can't come in tonight. He goes, that means you quit. I said, wow, really?
Mm.
So I hung up the phone. My mom came home and she was like, I was like, well, he said I quit. Well, I decided that wasn't the right career move for me. So I found another job, and that job was at a Montessori school down the street from my house. And I walked in and I began working in the baby room. And I had 8 babies. And after 4 o'clock every day, like from 4 to 6 for 2 hours, I was alone by myself with these 8 infants from 3 months to 1 year. And I had no childcare classes at all, just kind of a little bit of babysitting here and there. The lady who I worked with, her name was Pamela Kobe, and she was like an expert. She came in there, she whipped those diapers out and slapped them on the I was like, whoa. It was a whole new world. But this is what I learned. I learned that you have to learn how to manage your world. You know, the kids are going to be there. You have to learn how to manage your time and get everything done. You know, feed 8 kids, diaper 8 kids. So that was kind of the beginning of me realizing that I could, that you might see a situation that looks impossible, but once you have the right strategies in place, you can get it done. So I taught preschool for like 5 years, and that's before you even needed any kind of certifications. And then after that, I went, to school at Cal State Fullerton, ironically not studying education. I studied political science. And
is that because you had aspirations of being an attorney, or you just wanted to know about how politics work?
I loved political science, and I mostly loved international relations. I wanted to work. My ultimate goal at that time was to work for the State Department.
Okay.
And so I was really determined to do that. And that's why I ended up going to Sweden to study Russian and East European studies. So that's kind of how I got to Sweden, because they offered the program that I was interested in.
How do you connect all these worlds? From working in McDonald's to being to handling these 8 babies, to being a pop star, now being a scholar. How do you navigate? How do you tie all that up in a bow?
I just would say that everyone's journey is unique. I think people always look at someone else and they say, oh, their life is so great and they're doing such a great, they have money, or they have this, and I think, I've always been the kind of person who was very, very unaware of what other people are doing, not disengaged from other people, but when I want to do something, I'm like, this is for me. And I just move on it, and I've never been afraid to do that. So when I walked into, the Montessori school, I just kind of walked in there to see if, hey, you have a job? Is there something I can do? And my mother has always, my mother had been a kind of person that she does not allow any kind of barriers to hinder her, And so I know I'm African American. I know that there's discrimination. I know that there are people out there who might not feel comfortable around me, but when my soul and my spirit are speaking to me, it means that that's where I belong, regardless of what's going on with anyone else. And that's really how I feel.
That is awesome. And that's awesome to hear you be able to state it that way and state it with such confidence and conviction. Tell me about Good Works.
With Dr. Nakamura, that was the most amazing class. I'm very interested in positive momentum when people are doing good things. I know that, we have challenges in the African American community, but I think that we don't extract the good in our community enough. We don't extract all of the fantastic ideas that we are working on and all of the innovation that we have contributed to society. And so in that class, my focus was on looking at the good work of Black teachers. I'm a credentialed teacher. I'm African American. And I felt that it was a story that I had never read in any book. When Hope and we were talking about the idea of good work, and the field of psychology is predominantly a field of, it's a field that is dominated by white people, people of European descent, and so their perspectives are, the majority perspective in pretty much everything you read. And that's what I noticed. And I said, I think some other stories, it's time to tell some other stories in this field. So good work is a field within positive psychology, or it's an interest within the field of positive psychology. And Jeanne Nakamura is a pioneer in that field. And she has been working with Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who is very well known for his work on flow. And so actually good work was the second class I took with her. I also took the class about flow. And so right now, this idea of good work kind of encapsulates how people contribute within the context of their professions to the good work and the positive work that's going on.
Well, listen, I am excited about all of the things, wonderful things that you are doing, and I'm excited that you are pursuing your PhD. When are you due to graduate from that program and get your thesis, or what is your dissertation approved? What is the schedule for that, so we can be rooting for you?
That's a whole nother conversation.
Okay, all right, good enough.
But I can tell you, it's a really good question, because a lot of people really don't understand about how the dissertation process works or how the PhD process works. But you take all of your classes, and then you have to write a proposal, and then it has to be approved. And then once they approve it, you can do your research. And once you do your research, then you have to write about the research. And once you finish the research, they have to approve everything you wrote about. So right now, I'm actually going into I'm in my second year right now. And I'm estimating I have 2 more years. So I'm hoping, my prayer is that I'll be finishing in 2024.
We are rooting for you, and I know that you will accomplish that goal. I was listening to Black Soliloquy.
Oh, how did you like it?
And I have to tell you, I have a large catalog of music that exists in my head, right?
Okay.
In fact, I used to work for an organization that was musical in its foundation, right? We used to do ringtones and other different types of things that you would put on your devices. So I love music, and I love different genres of music. And I was thinking to myself, the best compliment I could pay to you on Black Soliloquy was it brought to mind Jamiroquai. It brought to mind Living Color. It brought to mind Terrence Trent D'Arby. And so I was like, wow, I just kind of, allowed my mind to go back. And there was some poetic energy about it that also made me think about neo soul. It made me think about the Erykah Badu's and the Jill Scotts. I'm a huge Jill Scott fan. That is my celebrity crush. My wife knows about it. She knows.
Okay. So you won't get in trouble.
I won't get in trouble when this airs. But tell us about Black Soliloquy. How did that come into being?
Well, first of all, I am like, I don't want to say a fan. I am a child of Nikki Giovanni. I love that woman just so much. And when I was about 9 or 10, we had an entire basement full of LPs.
Mhm.
So anyway, my mom got this record by Nikki Giovanni. And I'm telling you, when I heard Nikki Giovanni's voice and I heard her poetry, that record no longer belonged to my mother. Nikki Giovanni wrote this poem. Trying to think of the name of it right now. I'm so sad I can't think of it. But anyway, this poem was about her being, this kind of, it kind of put you in the mind of an Egyptian goddess. And
Mhm.
she was like, anyway, so I used to listen to that. Another recording that was with James Cleveland.
Mhm.
And the name of the poem was Peace Be Still. And that was something else that I listened to over and over again. But she is the essence of my poetry, because as I started writing poetry when at 10 years old, when I heard her music. And so the Black Magic Soliloquy was written right during the Watts riots in the 90s. I wasn't in the United States. I was actually in Sweden at the time. And I was just had so many emotions inside of me about what was going on. And I was so far away, and I wanted a way to kind of communicate how I was feeling. And I actually did not write that to go on on the CD that we were working on. I wrote it for myself. But it just so happened one night I was in the studio and we had some kind of loop going on with the beats and with this cello sound. And I was like, I want to try something. And I took out my book that I write all of my lyrics in. And I said, you guys listen to this and tell me what you think. And as I started reading it off, the guys were like so blown away. They're, oh, okay, yeah. And then, they go to work. They start mixing in all kinds of stuff. And, and then we called in some guys from our house band to come and play live. Everything you hear on that recording was played live.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
It sounds fantastic. It's so rich
And
and it
then,
has such emotion to it.
yeah. The other thing that happened, I just thought about it, is that year was the year that Nelson Mandela was released from Robben Island.
Mm.
Now, Nelson Mandela made his first trip outside of South Africa. His first trip was to Sweden because he was coming to visit his friend Oliver Tambo, who I believe had also been in prison with him.
Mm-hmm.
So when he came to visit Oliver Tambo was very ill, and he knew he was not going to live long. So he came to speak at the Uppsala Cathedral in the town where I live. And I had a really great friend from South Africa. Her name was Pat Imfiketo, and her aunt is actually a member of the South African Parliament, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, so we go see Nelson Mandela, and that was also the other inspiration. I was like, this is just too much,
Right.
So the other part of that song has a lot to do when I'm talking about, the deaths and the fact and the the things that Black women have to deal with in dealing with the deaths of their children. I was definitely thinking about South Africa and about LA and how much in common those experiences of those women are. So that was
Well, I
definitely
want you
part
to prepare
of it.
yourself, Suzie. Here's why. Because I'm going to take that song and I'm going to put it on my social media sites.
Oh my
Because I
gosh.
want everybody to enjoy that song and take from it what I took from it. And
Wow.
I'm going to state right now, given that you're a person who believes in self-fulfilling prophecies, I would imagine you'll get a couple phone calls,
Couple
wondering
phone calls.
where is this music coming from, and why is this the first time I've heard it, and how come you haven't released it, and how come you
Yeah.
haven't re-released it? But listen, I want to thank you for joining us on Black Lives Matter Radio this evening. I certainly love the conversation. I could talk to you all night about a number of things, but as is our tradition, the last question of the evening is reserved for Hope. So Hope, over to you to ask the last question and then to close us out.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Suzie. This has been such a great conversation. I love how the two of you just shine together. It's beautiful. But, I really want you to talk just a little bit, because I want to add you to our cover story for January 2021, which is What's Next in the Pandemic. And I know that you have a passion, obviously, for children and education. Talk to us a little bit about what's going on in the Black community with kids that are in lockdown and can't go to school, that don't sometimes have Wi-Fi, or there's like many children in the family struggling to get onto Wi-Fi. What do you see is happening currently? And also, how do you see that playing out in the future of education for these kids who are potentially losing a couple of years of their education?
Part of my research on Black teachers is also about Black children. And the dilemma that Black children face in the educational system, it was already difficult for African American children before the pandemic. But now, just gaining basic access to their education because they can't walk down the street to their neighborhood school has created a great deal of difficulty. There are two things that go on with the school. Number one, the school offers a care factor. Educators are there, and when kids go to school every day, kids are seen, their conditions are noticed. If there is an issue, oftentimes teachers who are caring about their students can address those issues. The other thing is that children are fed on a regular basis, and we do know that African American children experience higher levels of food insecurity. And those meals that they receive at school, that breakfast and that lunch, might be the only two meals that they receive. And so those are two really significant things that are impacting the fact that they're not going to the school building every day, let alone their lack of access to technology. The third thing is the protective factor, the security factor that children gain when they go to school, because we are seeing, and I saw a report on, I don't know, I believe it was on CNN. Well, I think it was some kind of administrator who was literally walking around a neighborhood, knocking on children's doors whom she had not seen since the beginning of the pandemic. And so, every day she had to investigate if these children were still living in the home, if they were able to access the technology and access school. So, that is a really big issue, let alone we've got kids who are committing suicide because of isolation. And we have more child abuse. All of those things are things where the school acts as an intermediary for the care of young children. So from that standpoint, I believe that, yes, physically, health-wise, children, African Americans, people of color have been affected at a higher degree. But I really need people to start talking about what's happening with children, because those are the ones who, in the long term, are going to see the greatest long-term effects. Like you said, missing out on a couple of years of school is a really big deal when you are in kindergarten. And the next time you start school, you're going to be maybe 7 years old before you enter a classroom. So all of those things mean that we should start doing things now and not wait for the results to come. This is the one, problem with our decentralized education system. We don't have a central way of addressing the needs of students in general, not just African American students. So, just like the pandemic was not taken seriously, the issues of children of color are not being taken seriously either. And I think it's going to be to our detriment. And, remember when I did my presentation in Dr. Nakamura's class, I'm speaking in front of a class of, I was the only African-American student in the classroom, and I was doing a presentation on Black teachers. And I experienced a very high level of disinterest in my subject. And they were not unashamed of demonstrating their disinterest. And I told them, I go, you have to understand, these are not just my children. These are your children. And those very same children who they wanted to discount were the same kids marching in the Black Lives Matter movement. And so I think it's time for everyone to wake up and realize we don't live in silos anymore. We are all connected. And if we don't start responding to the needs of the children in our community, it's going to have a definite impact on our own future.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah, Suzie, you're amazing. And I look forward to doing lots of cool things with you.
I am so excited about our work together.
Yeah. So
and Mr. Farmer, the same thing. I am just very excited about meeting you today.
Bless you.
The interview was just amazing. So just to let you know, I am an interview expert, right? Because I was in like 100 interviews in Sweden.
I'm sure.
And you have done just an amazing job. I can't give you, higher accolades. It was great.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. It means a lot. It does.
Well, Suzie, you'll be back. Incandescent Kids has your name written all over it. That is something that you and I have been talking about for a couple of years now. And so we'll just keep that going. That's definitely a 2021 initiative where we launch the newspaper for kids by kids, and we invite teachers who are experienced to teach and tutor kids everywhere. And hopefully that will provide a solution to some of these issues.
To some of these issues that are going on. Sorry, I did not come with a list of solutions today because I'm a solution-oriented person. But go ahead. You were going to say
I was going to say, don't worry none about that. We will definitely have plenty of time and space to talk about solutions and attack those. But it was important because what Hope and I do and what we would do for you and with you is just get the word out. To create awareness around some of the very specific issues that we're dealing with in our communities. Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate your work. And, if you ever want any ideas for folks for the show, let me know. Okay. Oh, definitely. We'll be in touch for sure.
Absolutely. Okay. Yes. Okay. And we'll continue this conversation for sure. Okay. Thank you so much, Suzie Love. In fact, we're going to put I don't know why I didn't do this before. You were the cover story of our July 2020 issue of Incandescent Women magazine, telling your fantastic history, and that I love that you got to talk about it again today. But we're going to put it on Incandescent Radio so that people can listen to it and Tony can share it from there. So that'll be excellent. Yeah, we'll just keep the love going. Well, keep the love going. Exactly. All right, we'll finish our episode right now. Thank you both. You are listening to our wonderful listeners. You are listening to the Black Lives Matter radio show on Incandescent Radio. I'm Hope Katz Gibbs with your host, Tony Farmer, and tonight's guest, Suzette Love. We will talk to you next Sunday. So that's all for today's episode of the Black Lives Matter radio show on incandescentradio.com. We have an amazing lineup of future guests, just like you heard on today's show. So be sure to tune in for another episode and tell your friends about us so they can listen too. If you or someone you know should be a guest on our show, send me an email, hopekatzgibbs@gmail.com, and we'll be in touch. Again, this is blacklivesmatterradioshow.com on the Incandescent Radio Network. We look forward to talking to you. Until then, stay safe and be well.